The Force is old and full of shadows.
The Jedi Temple meditation chamber holds the last light of Coruscant's dusk, thin gold bands falling through the high windows and dying on the stone floor. Dust hangs suspended in those bands, unmoving the way it only does in rooms built for stillness. Anakin kneels with his back straight and his jaw clenched so hard the muscle stands out beneath his skin. Sweat beads at his temples, though the chamber is cool. Behind his eyes, Padmé is dying again, the same nightmare looping for the 100th time. Her face pale, her hands reaching for something he can't give her, the sound of her voice fraying at the edges into something that isn't quite a word anymore. He has not told anyone about the dreams. He has barely admitted them to himself, turning them over only in the hour before sleep refuses to come, as though naming them too clearly might be the thing that makes them true. Yoda's cane taps the floor in a slow, even rhythm, the sound a small anchor in the room. 3 taps, a pause exactly as long as the 3 that preceded it. The old master has used this rhythm in this exact chamber for longer than most species civilizations have stood, a metronome keeping pace with a meditation neither of them is fully present for tonight. Mourn them do not, Yoda says, his voice carrying the worn cadence of 1,000 repetitions, the words smoothed by use into something closer to ritual than instruction. Mourn them. The sentence never finishes. Something underneath the universe gives way. It isn't sound, and it isn't silence. It is the absence beneath both, a pressure dropping out of the air, like a held breath finally released into vacuum. For one suspended instant, neither of them is anywhere at all. The chamber and the dusk and the dust motes all dissolving into something that has no spatial location, only weight. Anakin's vision white flashes, and 23 years arrive at once. Padmé on the cold floor of a hangar bay, his own scream tearing free of a throat that no longer feels like his. The suit closing over him, plate by plate, sealing him into a tomb that breathes for him. A red lightsaber, and a black helmet, and a son grown into a man he barely knows, standing across from him in a throne room lit the color of dried blood. Lightning, blue-white and merciless, arcing from an old man's hands toward a body that used to be his own. A reactor shaft, falling, the cold finding him before the bottom does. Luke's face, the mask coming off, his own eyes. Human eyes, the only thing about him left unburned. Seeing his son with them for the first time in decades, just before he dies in his arms on the deck of a half-built battle station. Anakin drops to one knee, his hand slamming flat against the floor to stop himself from falling further. The stone is cold under his palm, real in a way nothing else in his head feels real right now. Across from him, Yoda's cane clatters from his grip, the sound of it hitting stone strangely loud in a room gone otherwise silent. The old Jedi Master is drowning in his own flood, the clones turning their rifles on him without warning, a chip in each skull finding its trigger phrase at the same instant, across 100 different worlds. The screaming in the temple halls, younglings cut down by men who served beside them a heartbeat earlier, their small hands still raised in the old greeting gesture when the bolts find them. 23 years of exile distilled into one cave on a swamp planet, listening to his own failure breathe in the dark, the weight of all 900 years of his life bearing down on those final decades most of all. Dagobah's reign, ceaseless and gray. A boy named Luke arriving with more hope than sense, asking to be trained by a creature too tired and too guilty to refuse him. His own death, soft and unspectacular, 2 suns setting behind him as he becomes one with a force he spent 9 centuries misunderstanding. And after, the burning of the sacred texts, his own hand calling down the lightning to do it, telling a different boy that the Order's hubris was the lie all along, that the books had never been the point. Both of them gasp at the same moment, 2 separate lifetimes slamming back into bodies too young and too old to hold them. Anakin's hands fly to his own face first, fingers pressing against his cheekbones, his nose, his jaw, bare skin, warm and unbroken, faintly damp with the sweat of whatever just happened to him. He drags his palms down to his chest next, frantic searching for the cold curve of a breastplate that isn't there, the hiss of a respirator that doesn't come, the seam where flesh ends and machine begins. There is only his own heartbeat, fast and human and entirely his, hammering under skin that has never been opened and sealed shut around half a man. He is not wearing the mask. The relief should be enormous. Instead, it just makes the grief worse, because he remembers exactly what it felt like to wear it every single day. For 23 years, The particular claustrophobia of breathing through a machine that decided when and how much, the way even sleep had become something administered to him, rather than something he simply did. Yoda doesn't move for a long moment. When he finally looks up, his ancient face has lost the serenity Anakin has known his entire short life. There's no composure left in it at all, only devastation, raw and unguarded. The expression of someone who has just watched every choice he made detonate in slow motion across 2 decades he wasn't supposed to remember. His ears, usually held with the upright dignity of 9 centuries of discipline, have gone slack, drooping at an angle that makes him look for the first time Anakin has ever witnessed. Simply old. He understands. Not slowly, not through deduction. Instantly, completely. The way a body understands pain before the mind catches up. The code did this. The fear of attachment drilled into a frightened 9-year-old boy ripped from his mother and told that loving her was a flaw to be corrected, a weakness to be meditated away rather than a fact of being alive. The isolation, the refusal to let a child grieve year after year, until grief itself became something shameful, something to be hidden rather than felt. Every rule, built to produce serenity, had instead produced a wound that festered in silence for years, until a patient, watching predator, found it and pressed gently, expertly, exactly where it would do the most damage. Yoda built Darth Vader as surely as Sidious did. He simply didn't know it until this moment. He crosses the chamber on legs that have suddenly remembered 900 years of weight, each step slower than the last, as though the knowledge itself has added mass to a body that was already old beyond easy reckoning. The cane is forgotten on the floor behind him. He kneels in front of Anakin with visible effort, his small frame trembling with the strain of it, and says nothing about the pain in his joints, though it shows in the tightness around his eyes. A 3-fingered hand settles on Anakin's shoulder, warm and steady despite everything, the one fixed point in a room that has otherwise come unmoored from itself. "Failed you I did," Yoda says. "Blind we were. Sorry I am." The words land in a room that has gone entirely still. Anakin doesn't answer. There is no answer that fits, not yet, maybe not ever. For an apology from the one being in the galaxy who watched what he became and never once stopped loving him for it, who burned the very texts that built his faith, rather than let that faith calcify into something that could never again admit fault. His shoulders fold inward. The breath he's been holding since Tatooine, since the sand in his mother's body, and the Tuscans he slaughtered in a rage that still tastes like copper in his memory, finally breaks loose of him in a single ragged sound. He doesn't sob the way a child sobs. It's older than that, deeper, the grief of a man who has already lived an entire life of loss, and is only now, for the first time, allowed to feel it without judgment waiting on the other side, without a counsel ready to catalog the feeling as a symptom of something dangerous. Yoda doesn't lecture. He doesn't quote the code, doesn't speak of detachment or discipline or the path to serenity. He simply stays where he is, hand on Anakin's shoulder, kneeling on a floor that is hurting his old bones, and lets a grown man cry like the boy he never got to be. Outside the high windows, Coruscant's light slowly drains from gold to blue to the deep violet that precedes true night. Neither of them moves to turn on a lamp. The traffic hums faintly below. An entire civilization, unaware that the two beings sitting in this dim, quiet room have just inherited the knowledge of everything that civilization was about to lose. The temple's halls that will run with younglings' blood in another telling of this story. The Senate that will applaud its own chains. The names of 1,000 worlds that burned for a war engineered by one patient old man in a tower office not half a kilometer from where they now kneel. Eventually, Anakin's breathing evens. He wipes his face with the back of one hand, slow and unhurried, the gesture of someone re-entering his own body after a long absence, recalibrating to a frame that is younger, unscarred. Missing a hand, it will not lose this time if either of them has anything to say about it. Yoda reaches out and retrieves his fallen cane, his fingers closing around the worn grain of it like an old friend's hand, the small ritual of the motion steadying him as much as it ever has. Neither of them speaks of strategy. Not yet. There will be time for war rooms and chip locations. In the architecture of a war, neither of them wants to fight the same way twice. For now, there is only the floor beneath them, the dark settling outside, and the quiet, wordless understanding passing between a 900-year-old master and a 23-year-old knight who have between them already lived and died, and lived again. The timeline has already changed. Neither of them has said a word of plan, drawn a single line of strategy, moved a single piece on the board. It changed the moment they survived this together. Yoda's private quarters are smaller than the meditation chamber, the ceiling low enough that the room feels less like a temple and more like a confession box, lit by a single recessed glow strip that throws everything into amber shadow. 2 cups of tea sit untouched on a low stone table, steam long since stopped rising from either, the leaves inside gone soft and bitter from steeping too long. A single window looks out on a narrow shaft between towers. No view to speak of, which has always suited the room's occupant. Anakin sits cross-legged on a worn cushion, hands folded in his lap, posture rigid in the specific way of a man bracing for a verdict he's already decided he deserves. "Everything you will tell me," Yoda says. "Hold nothing back," so Anakin does. It comes out of him in one unbroken current, the words tripping over each other in their hurry to escape. 23 years of secrecy collapsing in the space of one conversation because there's, finally, no reason left to keep any of it. Palpatine's visits to his quarters, the careful, patient way the Chancellor had asked questions that sounded like concern and functioned like reconnaissance, each one a small hook set deeper than the last. The visions of Padmé dying in childbirth, recurring every night for weeks, vivid enough to taste, vivid enough that he'd begun flinching at the sight of her in daylight, because some part of him had already started grieving her in advance. The secret marriage on Naboo, 2 rings hidden inside a footlocker because the code left him no other place to put them, a wedding with no witnesses but a protocol droid in the lake outside the window. The fear, not of losing the war, not of the separatists, not of anything the Council would recognize as a legitimate threat. The fear of losing her, sharpened daily by a man who understood exactly which wound to keep open, who had spent years cultivating that wound the way a gardener cultivates rot, patiently, with affection, because rot was the crop he wanted. He tells Yoda about the inhibitor chips, the trigger phrase, Order 66, recited word for word, the way you'd recite the details of your own execution, each syllable of it landing in the small room like a stone dropped into still water. He braces for judgment the entire time. Old muscle memory, 23 years deep, expects the Council's silence, the slow withdrawal of trust, the verdict already written before the testimony finishes. He has lived through what happens when a Jedi confesses fear. He knows the ending by heart, has rehearsed it in his own head 1,000 times across 2 lifetimes now. The careful distance in Obi-Wan's eyes, the closing of ranks, the particular cruelty of an institution that asks for total honesty and then punishes you for providing it. Yoda lets the silence stretch after Anakin finishes. But it isn't the silence Anakin remembers. There's no calculation in it. The old master's eyes are wet, and for a long moment he says nothing at all, simply absorbing what he's been told the way a wound absorbs pressure before it finally bleeds. "Wrong. We were," Yoda says at last. "About much. About this most of all." Anakin's hands tighten in his lap. "Master, I know the code." Attachment leads to. "Know the code, you do," Yoda interrupts. "Not unkindly. Understand it you do not. Understood it myself I did not. Not until I burned it." Anakin blinks. "Burned it? A story for later, that is." Yoda's cane taps once against the stone floor, a small punctuation mark. "Listen now. Important this is." He shifts forward on his cushion, and something in his posture changes. Less grandmaster, more old man who has spent 900 years arriving slowly and at great cost. At a single sentence. "Not the love I feared, young Skywalker," Yoda says. "The fear of losing it, that was the poison." Anakin goes very still. "Sidious did not need to break your heart," Yoda continues, each word placed with the care of a man diffusing something, "only make you certain it could be broken. And once certain, act from that certainty alone." Yes, this he understood, better than the Order ever did. The logic of it settles into Anakin like something cold finding its level. 23 years of his life, the suit, the mask, Mustafar, the screaming younglings, all of it reframed in a single sentence. He hadn't fallen because he loved Padmé. He had fallen because he was taught that loving her was a crack in his armor, and then handed by a patient and brilliant predator the exact tool needed to widen that crack until it swallowed him whole. Until there was nothing left of the boy from Tatooine, but a mechanism for following orders. The Council would have called it attachment, Anakin says, his voice rough. They would have stripped me of her, of everything. Yes, Yoda says simply. And so alone, you went to the one being who did not ask you to give her up. Clever, Sidious was. Cruel also, but clever first. Anakin's throat works. I'm not giving her up. Not this time. I don't care what the code says. Did not ask you to, Yoda says, and something almost gentle moves across his ancient face. Married you are. Sanctioned, this marriage now is. Quietly. For now, quietly, but sanctioned. For a moment, Anakin doesn't seem to understand the words. Then they land, and something in his chest that has been clenched since he was 9 years old, since a hangar bay on Tatooine and a mother left behind in the sand, finally lets go. It isn't dramatic. There's no visible collapse, no tears this time. Just a long breath, leaving him slower than it came in. His shoulders dropping half an inch, the permanent tension at the corner of his jaw finally easing for what feels like the first time in years, in either life. Across the room, if either of them could see it reflected in the Force itself, Anakin's presence would no longer flicker the way it has for months, that faint, anxious static of a man perpetually braced for loss. It steadies instead, warms, settles into something whole, the way a held note finally resolves into the chord it was always reaching for. There is more, Yoda says, watching him carefully. Hear this also. Love was never the flaw in our Order's reasoning, Anakin. Attachment, the old word for it, fear gave us. But compassion, connection, the bonds between beings, these are not weaknesses to root out. These are the living force itself. Qui-Gon understood this. We did not listen. Then why? Anakin stops, recalibrates. Why did the code teach us to let go of everything? Why train us to mourn without yearning? To release every attachment like it was a sickness? Because afraid, the Order was. Yoda says, and the admission costs him something visible, a flinch he doesn't bother hiding. Afraid that loving too much, a Jedi could be turned. So instead of teaching control, taught suppression, we did. Easier, suppression is. Safer, it seemed. He shakes his head slowly. Wrong this was. A mind taught to suppress fear does not lose the fear, only buries it. And buried fear, Sidious finds easily. Found it in you, would have found it in any of us. Anakin absorbs this, turning it over slowly, the way a man examines a wound he has finally been given permission to look at directly. So what's different now? What do you want me to do instead? Feel, Yoda says simply. Feel everything. The fear, the love, the grief. Feel it fully and act not from the fear, but from stillness beneath it. Not numbness, stillness. A mind at peace can hold love without the poison. A mind at war with itself cannot remember this. Also, a still mind does not only resist the dark, it can refuse to feed it. What Sidious channels through fear, a mind without fear may simply decline to carry. It is, Anakin realizes, the exact opposite of everything he was ever taught. And somehow it feels less like rebellion and more like coming up for air after 23 years underwater. The first full breath of a man who didn't know how shallow his breathing had become, until something finally let him fill his lungs all the way. I don't know how to do that, he admits. No, already you do, Yoda says, and for the first time there's the faintest ghost of warmth in his voice, almost humor. Lived it, you have. 23 years of a life I will not ask you to recount tonight, but somewhere in it found peace. You did, briefly, with your son, at the end. Remember that feeling. Build from it, not from the suit, not from the mask, from the man you were in that final hour. Anakin's eyes close briefly. He does remember it. Luke's face without the helmet between them, the strange lightness of dying as himself instead of as the thing he'd built around himself for 2 decades, the particular relief of a man finally allowed to stop performing strength he no longer had any reason to perform. Sleep now you should not, I think, Yoda says, reaching for his tea, finding it cold, setting it back down without complaint, the small domestic gesture oddly grounding after everything that has just passed between them. Much to plan. Sidious does not rest, and neither tonight can we. But first, this. Needed saying first. Anakin looks at him, and for the first time since the meditation chamber, something in his expression is almost steady. Thank you, he says quietly, for all of it. Yoda inclines his head, and the low light of the chamber catches the new clarity settling over both of them. 2 beings no longer separated by rank or doctrine, but bound now by something neither the old code nor the war ever accounted for. Outside the narrow window, the shaft between towers holds nothing but darkness and the distant hum of a city that has no idea yet how close it came to a different ending, and how close it still might come if the two of them fail to move quickly enough. The council chamber holds its usual measured calm, though Yoda can feel the strain underneath it now in a way he never could before this week. A fault line running beneath the room's familiar serenity that only he and one other being in the galaxy can currently perceive. Mace Windu stands with his arms folded, his presence in the Force a tight coil of suspicion he's learned to leash, but never silence, a quality that has made him both the Order's most reliable warrior and its most difficult master to deceive. A separatist holdout, Mace says, repeating it back as though testing the words for weight, turning the phrase over the way he might turn over a blade to check its balance. In the Outer Rim, this intelligence comes from where exactly? Reliable the source is, Yoda says, and it isn't quite a lie, only an old man choosing, for the first time in centuries, which truths to withhold and why, weighing the cost of a small deception against the cost of an unprepared council walking into a confrontation they don't yet have the context to survive. Confirm it, you and Obi-Wan should. Personally, trust no relay for this. Mace studies him a moment longer than comfortable, his dark eyes narrowing with the particular scrutiny of a man who has spent decades learning to read the smallest tells in even the most disciplined faces. There's something in the old master's bearing he can't name, a stillness that feels less like serenity and more like grief recently survived. You're not coming. Other matters I have, Yoda says. Go quickly. Time, this requires. It works, because it has to. Mace's unease, the same unease that will, in another timeline, whisper to him that something is deeply wrong with Palpatine and be ignored, one fight too late. That will send him alone and unsupported into a tower office where 4 lightsabers will not be enough. Gets pointed at a fabricated cache of droid parts instead of the real war being fought one level above his perception. It is a small mercy disguised as a redirection, buying Mace another chance at a fight he loses badly the first time through. Yoda feels the small cruelty of the deception even as he commits to it. He swallows the feeling and lets the council room empty, watching Mace and Obi-Wan depart together toward a hangar bay, and a destination that will, this time, cost them nothing but a wasted afternoon. The works swallow them whole an hour after dark. Coruscant's underlevels have no sunset, only a permanent dim orange haze where industrial light fights through chemical smog and loses, the glow filtering down through 100 meters of structure above, until it arrives at street-level diffuse and sickly, the color of an infection. Acid rain hisses against corroded gantries, each drop finding old rust and adding to it, the whole architecture slowly dissolving by degrees that no one down here has the resources to stop. Neon signage bleeds sideways through the wet air, half the letters dead, advertising businesses that stopped existing decades ago. A cantina with no door, a parts dealer whose stock was repossessed before either of them was born. The smell here is coolant and rust, and something organic underneath it that neither of them names, though both recognize it for what it is. Anakin leads. That fact alone would have been unthinkable a week ago, when every operation moved through council approval and squad assignments, and the careful architecture of an institution that trusted its knights only within prescribed limits. 2 more levels down, he says, voice low, pitched to carry no further than the space between them. There's a maintenance shaft behind what looks like an abandoned droid foundry. Sidious kept a redundant data cache here, financial records, cloning contracts, things too sensitive to trust to a single Coruscant tower that could burn. Remember this place, you do, Yoda says. From the suit, from after. I patrolled past it 100 times and never knew what I was walking by, Anakin says. And something tightens in his jaw at the memory of a black-gloved hand resting against a wall he's currently approaching his flesh. The strange vertigo of recognizing a place through a body that no longer exists, that this body will never become, if the next few hours go the way he intends. Yoda moves beside him in near total silence, his small frame gliding across wet durasteel grating that should announce every footstep and announces nothing. His presence folded so deep into the Force that even the corridor's organic sensor crew, half asleep at a console 2 levels up, simply never thinks to glance at the right monitor at the right moment, their attention sliding past the relevant feed, the way water slides around a stone without ever quite touching it. Impressive trick, Master, Anakin murmurs. Old trick, Yoda says. Lazy security here is. Sidious trusts secrecy over vigilance. His mistake this is. Use it we will. A droid patrol, 2 old B-1 units, decommissioned from frontline service and repurposed as low-grade sentries, their paint long since flaked away to bare metal, rounds the corridor ahead. Optical sensors sweeping the gantry in a slow, mechanical arc. Anakin moves first this time. 2 quick strikes from a hidden vibroblade, dropping both units before their processors can so much as log an alert. The body's caught and lowered to the grating without a sound. Settled down with a care that has nothing to do with stealth, and everything to do with a man who has spent a war learning exactly how much noise a falling body makes, and choosing, now, not to make any. Could have done that more quietly, Yoda says, mild, the closest thing to a joke he's offered in days. That was quiet, Anakin says. Anakin almost laughs. The sound surprises him more than it should. An actual, unguarded laugh, the kind he hasn't produced without bitterness underneath it in years, in either lifetime, and it dies in his throat half-formed, startled out of him by its own unfamiliarity. The vault door, when they reach it, is old Republic stock repurposed and overlaid with a Separatist-era encryption lock, the kind of layered security that screams of a man hiding something even from his own allies. Distrustful of every party to his own conspiracy in equal measure, Anakin kneels at the panel, fingers finding the access code from a memory that technically hasn't happened yet. A maintenance override, he watched a protocol droid input 1,000 times in another life, in another body, wearing a mask that breathed for him, standing in this exact spot on 100 different inspection tours, of an empire that catalogued its own crimes with bureaucratic precision. The door grinds open on old hydraulics, the sound a long, reluctant groan that echoes once down the corridor and dies. Inside, the air changes, cooler, drier. Banks of old Republic-era terminals line the walls, their screens glowing the specific flat blue of hardware decades out of date, repurposed because outdated tech draws no flags and no maintenance requests, the kind of obsolete equipment no auditor would ever think to inventory. Anakin moves through the racks with the fluency of a man retracing his own footsteps, datapad in hand, pulling files with names that mean nothing to anyone who hasn't lived the war that's coming. CT program stash BO chip integration, auth, Tyrannus, separatist funding trail, industrial automaton shell accounts, audio log 0017, Chancellor Palpatine, encrypted channel. He plays 3 seconds of the audio log, just enough to confirm it, and Palpatine's voice, calm, paternal, unmistakably his, issues an instruction to Tyrannus about troop deployment time to extend the war by another 18 months. Anakin's hand tightens on the datapad until his knuckles whiten, the old fury rising fast and familiar, before he remembers, deliberately, to let it pass through him rather than gather. There it is, he says quietly. Proof. All of it. Yoda stands beside him, watching the data spike across the transfer readout, his expression unreadable in the terminal's blue light. Careful. We must be, how this is used. Proof of guilt, this is. Proof to the Senate's satisfaction. A harder thing, that will be. It's enough for now, Anakin says. It's a start. The download completes in under 2 minutes, the encrypted drive warm in Anakin's palm. By the time the transfer finishes, the small weight of it disproportionate to what it actually contains. Neither of them speaks as they retrace their path through the vault, back through the corridor where the 2 disabled droids lie where they fell. Their optical sensors dark, back into the acid rain, and the neon, and the smog-choked dark of the works. No alarm sounds behind them, no pursuit follows. The whole operation has cost them nothing but nerve. And somehow that feels heavier than a fight would have. The strange anticlimax of victory achieved through patience rather than violence. A currency neither of them has had much practice spending. They surface into the open Coruscant night 2 levels up, where the air is at least breathable, and the rain has thinned to mist, fine droplets catching the light of passing speeder traffic far overhead. Anakin looks down at the drive in his hand, a small, unremarkable thing, smaller than a fist, containing enough proof to end an empire before it's born. This is it, he says. This is what stops it all. Yoda's gaze follows the skyline, the Senate dome lit gold in the distance, Palpatine's office a single dark window among thousands of bright ones, a small blot of absence in an otherwise glittering field. Stops it, this might, Yoda says quietly, or starts something else entirely. Careful now, we walk. The data, we have. The war, we have not yet won. Above them, the Coruscant sprawl glitters on, oblivious, while two beings who have already watched it burn once carry the proof that might keep it from burning again. Walking back toward the temple through streets that have no idea how close they came, in another version of this same night, to a silence that would have lasted 23 years. The 501st barracks smell of polish and recycled air, the particular order of a place built for men who don't get to choose disorder. Every footlocker squared at the same angle. Every bunk made to a standard no one has had to enforce in years, because the habit runs deeper than the order that created it. Rex sits on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, watching fives across the room rub at his temple for the third time in an hour. It isn't the first time he's noticed it. Headaches, brief and sharp, gone as fast as they come. Dismissed by every brother who has won as nothing worth a medic's time. Just fatigue, just the war. Just another thing a clone learns not to mention, because mentioning it changes nothing, except how command files your name. Compliance spikes too. Moments where an order lands and a man's body responds before his mind finishes agreeing to it. A half-second lag between thought and obedience that none of them have ever had the vocabulary to describe as wrong. Rex has filed all of it under the general category of things a soldier doesn't examine too closely, because looking too hard at the architecture of his own obedience feels like a door he isn't sure he wants open, a question with an answer that might cost him something he can't afford to lose mid-war. He buries the unease the way he buries everything, under duty, under the next mission, under the small practiced discipline of a man who has learned that some questions are luxuries his life was never built to afford. Across the room, Fibes sets down the rifle he'd been field stripping and presses the heel of his hand against his temple again, harder this time, his jaw tight. "You all right, Fives?" Rex calls. "Fine, sir," Fives says. Too quickly, the kind of answer a man gives when he's decided in advance not to discuss the question. Just a headache. Same as always. Rex doesn't push it. That, too, is a habit deeper than the war. The door to the barracks slides open, and General Skywalker walks in beside a figure Rex has saluted 1,000 times, and never once seen look quite this tired. The small green master's gait slower than usual, his cane finding the floor with more deliberate weight than Rex has ever noticed before. "General, Master Yoda." Rex straightens, the rest of the room coming to attention behind him in a ripple that needs no order. Wasn't expecting an inspection. "Wellness audit," Anakin says. And there's something careful in how he says it, like a man handling a phrase he doesn't entirely believe in himself, testing its weight before committing his full voice to it. Council's ordered neurological screenings, battalion by battalion. Fatigue, aggression incidents. Command wants it documented. Rex's eyebrows lift a fraction. Didn't think the council noticed those. They're noticing now, Anakin says, and something flickers behind his eyes that Rex can't read, gone before he can name it. It's a thin cover story, and Rex is sharp enough to feel the thinness of it without quite naming why. He's spent a war learning to read his general's tells. And right now, Anakin Skywalker has the bearing of a man walking into a surgery he already knows the outcome of. The particular calm of someone who has rehearsed this exact moment more times than he could count. In a life Rex has no way of knowing existed. "You first, Captain," Yoda says. "Sit." Rex sits on the edge of a medical cot wheeled in for the occasion, more out of habit and trust than conviction, the worn vinyl creaking faintly under his weight. Anakin kneels beside him, and for a moment there's an absurdity to the scene. A Jedi general and a 900-year-old grandmaster, hovering over one clone trooper like the fate of the galaxy, hinges on this exact procedure. It does, though neither of them says so. "This is going to feel strange," Anakin warns. "Stay still." Yoda places 2 fingers against the base of Rex's skull, just below the occipital ridge, his eyes closing. Anakin's hand hovers a few inches from the same spot, his focus turned inward, sifting through fragments of a memory that technically hasn't happened. A black armored hand resting on a medical scanner, reading out chip coordinates with the casual precision of routine maintenance. An empire that cataloged the architecture of its own control, with the same bureaucratic thoroughness it applied to everything else. "There," Anakin murmurs. 2 centimeters lateral, base of the brainstem, small, cylindrical. Yoda's brow furrows in concentration. and the air around the cot seems to thicken, the way pressure builds before a storm that never quite breaks into sound. Rex's jaw tightens involuntarily. He feels nothing sharp, nothing invasive, only a strange, deep pressure, like a held breath finally letting go from somewhere he didn't know he was holding it, a tension he has carried for so long he'd stopped registering it as separate from his own pulse. The Force healing is not surgery in any sense, Rex understands. There's no incision, no blood, only Yoda's focus narrowing to a single point, and the chip, dormant and biological and never meant to be found, simply ceasing to be anchored. It comes free without violence, a thread cut clean rather than torn, the small, terrible thing that has lived at the base of his skull since before he could remember not existing, simply releasing its hold and dissolving into something the Force absorbs and discards. Rex gasps, the sound involuntary and sharp, a noise that surprises him as much as it surprises anyone listening. For a moment, he doesn't move. Then his hand goes to the back of his own skull, fingers pressing against unbroken skin, checking for a wound that isn't there the way a man checks a phantom limb. Certain something must have changed on the outside to match whatever just changed within. "Captain?" Anakin asks, watching him closely. Rex doesn't answer right away. Something in his chest has shifted, subtle but unmistakable, a low-grade tension he never identified as tension until its absence makes the difference obvious, the way a man only notices the weight of a pack once it's finally set down. He feels, for the first time in longer than he can name, entirely his own. "I don't know what that was," Rex says slowly, "but I feel..." He stops, searching for the word. "Lighter." "Good," Anakin says, and the relief in his voice is almost too large for the moment, the residue of a man who has watched this exact soldier turn a blaster on him, in another life, who has carried the memory of Rex's face going slack with obedience, as the trigger phrase landed, and a decade of loyalty meant nothing against a few words of code. "That's good, Rex." Yoda sits back, breathing slow, the procedure having cost him something visible in the set of his shoulders, a fatigue that settles into his small frame like sediment. "One down," he says. "Many more there are." Fives is next, and he submits to the procedure with the same wary compliance as Rex, his headache vanishing partway through with an abruptness that leaves him blinking, almost laughing, his hand pressed flat against his chest as though checking that his own heartbeat hasn't changed along with everything else. "That's been there since Camino, hasn't it?" Five says afterward. Not quite a question, his voice carrying the particular steadiness of a man who has just understood something large, and is choosing, for now, not to let it shake him visibly. "Whatever that was." "Since before either of us knew to ask," Anakin says. Fives looks at him for a long moment, weighing something. "Sir, if there's more to this than a wellness audit, I'd rather know, even if it's bad." "There's more," Anakin says. "I'll tell you everything, Fives, just not tonight. Tonight I need you to trust me a little longer." "I've trusted you this far, sir," Fives says. "I can manage a little longer." He glances over at Rex, who gives him a small nod, the kind of wordless exchange that needs no translation between two brothers who have survived the same war side by side since the day they were decanted. Whatever has just been lifted from them, neither man fully understands it yet. But both of them recognize, in the easing of something they'd never had a name for in the first place, that it was never meant to stay. The scan from Rex's extraction becomes the template. Back in a secure corner of the barracks' data terminal, Anakin builds the slicer virus himself, fingers moving with a fluency that belongs to a man who once oversaw an empire's worth of military infrastructure, who spent 23 years learning every weakness in systems just like this one from the inside of a mask that gave him nothing else to do but study. He encodes the deactivation sequence inside a routine software patch, disguised as standard battalion firmware, false update logs, encrypted packets indistinguishable from the 1,000 other maintenance pushes the Grand Army receives without scrutiny, buried so deep in the routine churn of military bureaucracy that no automated flag will ever so much as glance at it twice. Standard patch deployed tonight to the 501st and Allied units flagged for elite deployment, Anakin says, watching the upload bar crawl forward. No one checks these. No one's ever had reason to. "Spread silently, it will," Yoda says, watching over his shoulder. "By morning free, many will be, and know nothing of why. That's the point," Anakin says. "They don't need to know yet. They just need to not be a loaded weapon anymore." The patch deploys at 0200 hours, riding alongside diagnostic updates and ration scheduling and a dozen other mundane administrative tasks no clone trooper has ever thought twice about. Across the barracks, men sleep through the procedure entirely, their bodies registering only the faint, dreamlike pressure of something letting go deep beneath conscious awareness, a sensation some of them will remember in the morning only as an unusually good night's sleep, the first in longer than they'd admit. By the time the Coruscant sun breaks over the horizon, the 501st Legion, the unit that will, in another timeline, march into the Jedi Temple on Anakin's own order and cut down children, their faces blank with a compliance none of them chose, no longer carries the trigger for that order in its blood at all. Rex finds Anakin alone near the barracks' viewport an hour before dawn, the city lights below thinning toward sunrise, the sky over Coruscant's spires beginning to pale at its lowest edge. "Sir," Rex says, "something's different. I can't explain it, but—" He shakes his head. "Half the men in my squad slept like they hadn't in months. I don't know what that audit actually was. But I trust you enough not to ask." Anakin looks at him for a long moment, and the weight of everything he can't yet say presses against his chest. The gratitude, the guilt, the memory of a different Rex on a different day, receiving a different order, and obeying it without hesitation because a chip in his skull left him no other choice. The memory of 100 other troopers, whose names he never learned doing the same thing in 100 other places at the same exact hour. "You don't have to understand it yet, Captain," Anakin says quietly. "Just know that whatever you and your men were built to be capable of, that's not happening. Not while I'm breathing." Rex studies him, sensing the shape of something enormous behind the words without yet seeing its outline. "That a promise, General?" "It's the only one that matters," Anakin says. Beside him, unseen, Yoda watches the dawn climb over Coruscant's skyline and feels something settle in the force that has not been settled in this war since it began. An army built for slaughter, quietly, invisibly. Disarmed, before it ever had the chance to fire, an entire generation of men freed from an ending none of them ever knew they were walking toward. In his office above the Senate dome, Palpatine sits very still. He has felt disturbances in the Force before, minor flickers, the predictable noise of a galaxy at war, the small ripples of fear and death that wash through the dark side like weather he has learned to read for his own purposes. But this one arrived 3 days ago like two stars colliding somewhere just out of sight, and it has not faded since. Anakin's presence has changed. Steadier, warmer. The flickering instability that made him so easy to read, so easy to guide toward despair, has simply vanished, replaced by something settled and whole that Palpatine cannot account for. A silence where there used to be a wound he could press at will. And the clones, reports trickling in from Camino, from battalion medical logs of anomalous neural scans across multiple legions, patterns that, on closer analysis, resemble surgical intervention no one authorized. Small anomalies that any single report might have dismissed, but that, accumulating across dozens of units in the span of a single week, have begun to form a shape he doesn't like. His first read is arrogant, because arrogance has served him for 40 years, and he sees no reason to abandon it now. Yoda has noticed Anakin's growing power, he reasons. The old fool means to claim him fully for the Council, to wall him off, to undo months of careful isolation in a single stroke. Irritating, recoverable. He has contingencies for this, has always had contingencies for everything, built redundancy into every scheme the way a careful architect builds redundancy into a structure meant to outlast its builder. The hypothesis that the boy might remember a future that hasn't happened yet does not occur to him. It exists entirely outside the architecture of his own certainty, and certainty has always been Palpatine's blind spot disguised as his greatest strength, the one flaw 40 years of victories has never once forced him to examine. He sends the summons through temple channels that evening, a request phrased with his usual paternal warmth, for Anakin to join him for a private conversation, the kind of invitation he has extended a dozen times before and that has never once been refused. It is not Anakin who arrives. Yoda enters the Chancellor's office alone, cane tapping once against the polished floor before falling silent. The room is dim, lit by Coruscant's distant glow through tall windows. The city's lights spread out below like a field of dying embers. And Palpatine rises from behind his desk with the smile he has worn in this room for years. Warm, unhurried, the mask of a tired statesman glad for company. Master Yoda, I'd hoped for young Skywalker, but I confess I'm glad of the company regardless. Palpatine gestures to a chair. Please. Yoda doesn't sit. The room's temperature doesn't change, not literally, but something in the air thickens regardless. A stillness radiating outward from the small green figure that has nothing to do with menace, and everything to do with absolute, unshakable certainty. Palpatine has spent decades reading Jedi composure as a kind of performance, a mask over fear they refuse to name. The same threadbare serenity he's learned to peel back layer by layer in 100 other conversations. This is not that. This is a being who has already lived through everything Palpatine intends to do, and found, on the other side of it, peace instead of fear. It is the first thing in 900 years of careful study that Palpatine has never encountered before, and it unsettles him in a way he cannot immediately name, a small cold thread working its way up through the warmth of his own performance. Busy young Skywalker is, Yoda says simply, came in his place I have. How thoughtful. Palpatine's smile doesn't waver, but his eyes sharpen testing. I trust nothing troubling occupies him. Troubling. Many things are, Chancellor, Yoda says. The war, the Senate's patience, thinning. Clones, behaving strangely of late. Have you heard of this? It's a precise blade, disguised as small talk, and Palpatine's mind races to assess how much is probe and how much is knowledge. Strangely how. Calmer, Yoda says. Steadier, as though a weight, lifted from them, has been. He lets the silence after the sentence stretch exactly long enough to be unbearable. Strange, that is. Wonder, I do, who would arrange such a weight to be placed there in the first place? Palpatine's hand, resting on the desk, goes very slightly still. For the first time since this conversation began, for the first time in longer than he can comfortably measure, something close to genuine alarm moves through him. Not fear of defeat, not yet, but the cold recognition that the board in front of him contains pieces he did not place and cannot yet see, an opponent playing a game whose rules he no longer fully understands. An interesting choice of words, Master Yoda, Palpatine says, his voice carefully even, almost as though you suspect deliberate design behind a war I too find regrettable. Suspect nothing I do, Chancellor, Yoda says, and the directness of it lands harder than any accusation could. No, I do. The silence that follows is the longest of Palpatine's political life, a held breath stretched across a room that has suddenly become very small. He recovers his smile a half-second too slowly, the mask sliding back into place with visible effort. Then I look forward to whatever evidence supports such a remarkable claim, when you're ready to share it. Until then, I have a republic to steady. He gestures faintly toward the door. Give my regards to young Skywalker. I do hope to see him soon. Yoda inclines his head and departs without another word, his footsteps unhurried, his presence and the Force radiating a serenity that feels, to the man watching him go, less like peace and more like the calm of a verdict already passed. The quiet of a courtroom after the sentence has already been read, and only the formality of announcing it remains. The moment the door closes, the warmth drains from Palpatine's face entirely. He sits in the dark of his own office, alone, and for the first time in the war he has spent years engineering. He recalculates rather than dictates, running through contingencies that suddenly feel thinner than they did an hour ago. The old plan, slow isolation, the careful corruption of one Jedi into a weapon, the eventual purge executed at his leisure, no longer survives contact with whatever Yoda now knows. Speed, he decides, must replace patience. If Yoda is preparing something, evidence or otherwise, then the answer is not defense. The answer is to move first, loudly, publicly declare the Jedi traitors to the Republic before they can declare him anything at all, and let the chaos of accusation drown whatever truth might follow it. The same tactic that has carried him through 40 years of careful manipulation, now deployed in haste rather than at his own chosen pace. He reaches for his calm and begins composing the address that will summon the full Senate into emergency session, his fingers moving faster than they have in years, the first crack of genuine urgency showing through decades of practiced calm. Across the city, Yoda finds Anakin waiting in the temple's high garden, the city sprawling gold and endless beneath the dusk, speeder traffic threading between towers and long unbroken ribbons of light. Moved up his plans he has, Yoda says without preamble. Felt it in him. The fear finally arriving. Acting from it now, he will. Anakin's jaw tightens, but there's no panic in it. Only the focus of a man who has already lived this war once and refuses to lose it twice. Then we move faster. Yes, Yoda says. Faster, we must. Tonight, perhaps. Tomorrow, certainly. No time left to wait for him. Above them, far across the city, the lights of the Senate Dome burn late into the night, for the first time in months, and in his office alone, mask finally and fully discarded, Palpatine begins, for the first time in this entire saga, to feel the shape of something he cannot control closing in around him, a sensation so unfamiliar that it takes him most of the night to recognize it for what it is. The Senate Rotunda fills past capacity, thousands of floating pods packed into the cavernous chamber under emergency session lighting. The air thick with the particular anxiety of a body that knows something enormous is coming and has not been told what. Murmurs ripple from pod to pod in overlapping waves, senators leaning toward their aides, toward each other, trading half-formed theories about war votes and emergency powers, and a dozen other possibilities that all turn out, within the hour, to be far smaller than the truth. Chancellor Palpatine's podium rises at the chamber's center, draped in the dignity of an office he has spent a lifetime weaponizing, the great curved dais lit from below in the warm gold that has always made him look, to the senators who trust him, like something closer to a father than a politician. Yoda and Anakin walk in together, unarmed in posture if not in fact, their lightsabers clipped and dormant at their belts. No escort, no announcement, just two figures crossing the chamber floor while 1,000 senators turn to watch. Murmurs rippling outward like a stone dropped into still water, the whole vast room shifting its attention by degrees until every pod in the rotunda has found the same two small shapes moving across the marble below. Palpatine, mid-address, falters for exactly half a second, a flicker so brief most of the chamber doesn't catch it at all. Master Yoda, General Skywalker, his voice recovers its warmth instantly, pitched to carry through the whole chamber, every word calibrated for the back rows as much as the front. Your timing is providential, given the grave matter I called this session to address. The troubling pattern of Jedi overreach that has come to my— Forgive the interruption, Chancellor, Anakin says, his voice steady and carrying, pitched to match Palpatine's own projection without straining for it. But there's something the Senate should see first. He doesn't wait for permission. The Coruscant data feed Anakin seeded an hour earlier detonates across every hollow screen in the chamber, simultaneously, thousands of pods flooding at once with the same evidence, the same damning architecture of proof. Cloning contracts bearing Tyrannus's authorization codes, the Separatist general's signature inked across documents that have no business existing in a Republic treasury ledger. Financial trails threading from Separatist shell accounts directly into accounts the Senate's own auditors will confirm trace back to Coruscant, the money moving in patterns too deliberate to be coincidence. And then, unmistakable looping on every screen at once, the audio log, Palpatine's own voice, calm and paternal, and utterly damning, instructing Tyrannus to extend the war by another 18 months for reasons that have nothing to do with peace. The gasp that moves through the rotunda isn't metaphorical. It is a physical sound, 1,000 throats catching at once, followed by an eruption of voices too tangled to parse into words, the noise building from a murmur to something closer to a roar in the space of a few seconds. Bail Organa rises halfway from his pod, his expression caught between vindication and horror, the look of a man who has suspected something for years and finds no comfort at all in being proven right. Beside him, Mon Mothma's hand goes to her mouth. Several pods away, Padmé sits frozen, watching the man she has trusted and worked beside for years dissolve in real time under the weight of his own recorded voice, her knuckles white where they grip the rail of her pod. Palpatine's mask doesn't shatter all at once. It fails the way old Durasteel fails. Small fractures first, a flicker of genuine alarm crossing his face before he buries it, his hands gripping the podium's edge. "This," he begins, and for the first time in the session his voice carries an edge of something almost convincing as confusion. "This is fabrication, a conspiracy, clearly designed by elements within the Jedi Order who have grown suspicious of legitimate executive authority, and seek to— The cloning facility on Coruscant's lower levels can be verified by any independent Senate audit team within the hour," Anakin says, cutting cleanly through the deflection. "The financial accounts can be traced by your own Treasury office. We're not asking the Senate to take our word for it, Chancellor. We're asking them to check. A desperate Jedi plot. Palpatine tries again, louder now, reaching for the old rhythm of persuasion that has carried him through 40 years of careful manipulation. I have served this republic faithfully since. Heard your own voice. The Senate has, Chancellor, Yoda says, and his tone carries no theater at all, only the terrible weight of simple fact. Authorize the chip program you did. Extend the war you ordered. Deny it now. You may. Believe it? No one here will. The chamber's noise builds towards something approaching chaos. 1,000 senators talking over each other, demanding clarification, demanding action, demanding answers Palpatine no longer has the architecture to provide. His gambit, victimhood, conspiracy, the wounded statesman, collapses under its own weight, because the evidence isn't circumstantial. It's his own voice, his own authorization codes, his own decades of careful crime laid bare in front of the body he spent that same time manipulating. Something shifts behind his eyes, the warmth drains out of his face entirely, replaced by an expression none of the senators present have ever seen on Chancellor Palpatine: cold, calculating, and entirely without performance. The face of a man who has finally stopped pretending the performance was ever going to be enough. You have no idea, Sidious says, his voice dropping into a register that carries none of the Chancellor's careful paternal music, what you have just done. The temperature of the room changes before anyone fully understands why. Senators nearest the podium recoil instinctively, some animal part of them registering danger their conscious minds haven't caught up to yet. Bail Organa grabs Mon Mothma's arm and pulls her back from the rail. Palpatine rises from his chair. The motion is unhurried, deliberate, a man discarding 40 years of disguise in a single fluid gesture. His robes seem to darken in the chamber's emergency lighting, or perhaps it's simply that no one is bothering to see him as anything other than what he is anymore. His hand lifts, fingers curling, and a faint blue-white light begins to gather at his fingertips, restrained, building the first visible proof of power that no chancellor has ever been permitted to wield in this chamber's history. The rotunda erupts. Senators scream and scramble for the exits in a tangle of floating pods, security droids surging forward uselessly against a threat their programming has no category for. Padmé's pod jerks backward on its repulsors, her hand instinctively reaching for a blaster she isn't carrying. Bail Organa shouts something lost in the noise. Mon Mothma is on her feet, pulling junior senators away from the rail. Anakin and Yoda stand their ground at the chamber floor's center, unmoving in the eye of the storm building above them. There it is, Anakin says quietly, watching the lightning gather and pulse at Palpatine's fingertips. The last mask finally and fully gone. There he is. Yoda's hand moves to his lightsaber hilt, though he does not yet draw it. Begun, this has, he says, his voice carrying none of the panic flooding the chamber around them, only the calm of a being who has already lived through worse, and chosen, this time, to stand differently. Above the podium, Sidious's hand glows brighter, the gathered energy crackling now with audible menace, his eyes, yellow, ancient, finally unconcealed, fixed on the two figures who refuse to run. The lightning comes first for the senators. Sidious doesn't hesitate, doesn't pause for theater. His free hand sweeps sideways, and a bolt of crackling blue-white energy tears through two Senate guards stationed near the podium, dropping them before either can raise a weapon. The brutality of it strips away any last flicker of sympathy that might have lingered in the chamber. This is not a wounded statesman defending himself. This is a predator clearing the floor. "Move them back," Anakin shouts, and Yoda is already moving, his small frame a blur of green motion as he catches a fleeing senator's pod with an outstretched hand, redirecting its panicked trajectory away from a collapsing support strut. Another pod, hurled by a wild burst of force energy from Sidious's other hand, arcs toward a cluster of fleeing aides. Yoda intercepts it mid-flight, absorbing the impact through his own body and setting it down gently, his economy of motion almost serene against the chaos surrounding him. Every gesture pared down to exactly what's needed and nothing more. Anakin draws his lightsaber and goes on the offensive. His blade meets Sidious's crimson weapon in a shower of sparks, the sound of it ringing out across the chamber floor and bouncing back off 1,000 silent pods. And the swordwork that follows bears no resemblance to either the reckless aggression of the boy he once was, or the brutal grief-fueled efficiency of the man he became in another life. This is something new. Gemso pressed forward with total emotional control. Every strike measured, every defense calculated, 3 moves ahead. A swordsman fighting from clarity instead of fear or fury. Each exchange of blows landing with the patient precision of a man who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose by taking his time. Sidious feels the difference immediately, and it unsettles him more than the blade itself. Remarkable, Sidious hisses, parrying a strike that should have driven him backward and somehow only makes him retreat half a step. You fight like a man who has already won this duel 1,000 times before. Something like that, Anakin says, and presses forward again. The duel sprawls across the chamber floor. Senators' pods scattering overhead like startled birds. Emergency lighting throwing long red shadows across marble and durasteel. The whole rotunda transformed in minutes, from a hall of debate into something closer to a battlefield, the architecture never built to survive what's happening inside it now. Sidious adapts with the speed of a man who has survived 4 decades of political combat by never relying on a single weapon. When his blade work fails to find purchase against Anakin's relentless precision, he shifts tactics, hurling a savage burst of force energy not at Anakin, but sideways, toward a cluster of senators frozen in panic near a collapsed railing. Yoda is already there. He intercepts the blast with both hands raised, absorbing and redirecting it into the chamber's reinforced floor, the impact scarring stone but sparing the senators behind him by less than a meter. It costs him something visible, a fractional stagger quickly recovered, and Sidious notes it with the cold satisfaction of a man finding the first crack in an otherwise flawless wall. "Even you tire, old friend," Sidious says, circling. "Tire, perhaps," Yoda says, lightsaber finally igniting in his hand, a green blade impossibly fast for a frame so small and so old. "Fail, I will not." The fight becomes a true 2 against 1. Yoda and Anakin orbiting Sidious, with a coordination that requires no spoken signal between them, each anticipating the other's openings with an ease that comes from 2 minds who have, in some sense, already fought this war together once before, their movements interlocking the way 2 hands fold together rather than 2 strangers improvising a strategy in real time. Sidious is forced backwards step by step, his crimson blade meeting 2 angles of attack at once, his free hand crackling with restrained energy he hasn't yet dared release in full. He nearly breaks through anyway. A feint toward Anakin draws the expected parry, and Sidious uses the half-second opening to lash out instead toward a young senatorial aide cowering near the podium's base, his lightning arcing for a killing strike on a target who has done nothing but exist in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Anakin's free hand snaps up on pure instinct, catching the edge of the blast and deflecting it skyward. The aide, spared by inches and a reflex Anakin didn't know he still had, the residual current scattering harmlessly against the chamber's high-vaulted ceiling. "You'd kill a child to win a point," Anakin says, breathing hard, contempt thick in his voice. "I would kill anyone to win," Sidious says simply. "That is the only difference between us that has ever mattered." The duel sharpens after that, Sidious recognizing, with the dawning unease of a man whose every contingency is failing in sequence, that conventional swordplay will not break this pairing. And that scattered lightning bursts only cost him ground without gaining any. He retreats 2 full steps, putting distance between himself and both blades, and his expression shifts into something colder, more deliberate, the look of a gambler deciding to wager everything on a single hand, because the smaller bets have all already failed. He has decided, Anakin realizes, to stop testing and start ending this. Sidious raises both hands, and the air around him distorts with the sheer density of power gathering at his fingertips. Not a probing bolt this time, but the full, apocalyptic release the Senate Rotunda has never witnessed and was never built to survive. Yoda moves to intercept, but Sidious's eyes lock onto Anakin alone, the lightning aimed with total, narrow focus at the one target he has decided, in this final calculation, represents the greater threat. "Let us see," Sidious says, his voice dropping into something ancient and merciless, "what you have truly become." The lightning unleashes in a single devastating arc, blue-white and screaming, tearing across the space between them faster than thought, the air itself seeming to ignite along its path. Anakin doesn't raise his blade. He doesn't dive for cover, doesn't flinch, doesn't do any of the things the man he used to be, armored, fearful, desperate to protect what he loved by destroying anything that threatened it, would have done on instinct. Instead, his free hand rises, palm open, fingers spread, a gesture of total and deliberate exposure rather than defense. The same stillness Yoda spoke of 2 nights ago settling over him, like a held breath he no longer needs to release. For one fraction of a second, time seems to slow around that open hand. He thinks, absurdly, of a cave on Dagobah, and rain that never stopped, of Luke's face the moment the mask came away, of a single still hour at the very end of a life he no longer has to live again. He thinks of Yoda's words in a small confession box of a room 2 nights past. A still mind does not only resist the dark, it can refuse to feed it, and understands in the space of a single heartbeat that this is the moment those words were always pointing toward, not a lesson rehearsed, a lesson lived. Yoda, several meters away, goes utterly still, watching, his old hands tightening around his lightsaber hilt, though he makes no move to intervene, some instinct telling him that this is not a moment that can be saved by interference, only witnessed. The lightning closes the final distance, a wall of raw, destructive energy aimed squarely at an open, unguarded hand, the same technique that once tore through a fearful, conflicted man on a different battle station in a different lifetime, and left nothing of him but ruin. Bones rebuilt in durasteel, lungs replaced with machinery, a voice that would never again sound entirely human. It strikes. The lightning hits Anakin's palm and finds nothing to feed on. There is no scream. There is no buckling of knees, no spine arching back in agony, none of the violence this exact technique once visited on a man torn between love and the terror of losing it. Anakin's hand simply meets the strike, fingers curling slightly inward, as though catching rain rather than ruin, his expression calm in a way that reads, to the one person in the chamber who understands what he's looking at, as something close to impossible. The current pools and scatters harmlessly off his open palm, the energy finding no fear in him to corrupt, no resistance to overwhelm, no desperate grasping to exploit. Yoda's teaching settles into the moment with quiet, devastating clarity. A calm and accepting mind can starve what a fearful one cannot help but feed, and there is no fear left in Anakin Skywalker for Sidious's lightning to weaponize against him. The light from the bolt throws his face into sharp relief, every line of it visible and unguarded, a man entirely present in his own skin for the first time either lifetime has allowed him to be. Impossible, Sidious breathes, and for the first time in 900 years of careful, patient cruelty, his voice carries something raw and unrehearsed. The current at Anakin's palm sputters, denser sparks scattering uselessly into the air, refused rather than redirected. He could turn his blade against the source. The old Anakin would have charged blindly. Vader certainly would have, meeting violence with violence in brutal mirrored kind, answering power with greater power until something broke. He doesn't. Instead, his hand simply drops, slow and deliberate, the last threads of current dissipating against the marble at his feet, spent and harmless. The choice costs him nothing and announces everything. This is not vengeance dressed as power. This is mastery, total and absolute, refusing to become the thing that tried to consume it. Sidious's hands fall empty at his sides. His face, stripped now of every careful mask he's worn for 40 years, shows something none of his enemies have ever been permitted to witness: genuine, unguarded terror. The technique that made him untouchable, that turned senators and Jedi alike into kindling for his ambition, has just failed against an opponent who isn't fighting from the same fear that has always been the engine of Sidious's own power. For the first time since he first drew on the dark side as a boy on Naboo, the architecture of his entire philosophy has just failed to hold weight, and there is nowhere in his 900 years of cunning to retreat to from that particular realization. You feel nothing, Sidious says, and it isn't an accusation. It's a man realizing too late that his entire model of the universe has just been proven wrong in the worst possible moment to discover it. I feel everything, Anakin says quietly. That's the difference. Around them, Yoda has not stopped moving. While the chamber's attention narrows entirely to the duel's center, he weaves between scattered senators and panicked aides, his small frame deceptively swift, shielding a cluster of pods from falling debris with an outstretched hand, guiding a stumbling junior senator back from the chamber's collapsed rail with the gentlest possible pressure. His role in this final movement is protective rather than offensive, almost ceremonial in its restraint. He understands, without needing to be told, that this moment belongs to Anakin alone. The chosen one, fulfilling a prophecy the old order spent a generation arguing over, not through destruction but through mastery, not by becoming the most powerful weapon in the room, but by refusing to be a weapon at all. Sidious takes a step back. It's an unconscious motion, instinct overriding the decades of discipline that have always kept him composed in the face of every threat he's ever faced. His eyes flick toward the chamber's edge, toward the senators still fleeing, toward any avenue that might offer escape from an opponent who has just demonstrated in front of the entire Galactic Senate that the one weapon Sidious believed made him unkillable simply does not work on a mind unwilling to fear him. "This isn't over," Sidious says, but the words carry none of their usual menace, thin and brittle in a voice no longer capable of disguising what's happening underneath it. "It's closer to over than you think," Anakin says, advancing one measured step at a time, his lightsaber still extinguished at his side, his bare hand still faintly warm from the last residue of spent current. Sidious's robes catch on a fallen support strut as he retreats further, his composure fracturing visibly now. The careful architecture of 40 years' performance collapsing in real time in front of the body he spent that same span of years manipulating. He reaches for his lightsaber, the crimson blade flickering to life in a hand that trembles for the first time anyone present has ever witnessed. It's a small, almost pathetic gesture against what he's just watched happen, and some distant part of him seems to know it. Yoda moves to Anakin's side without hurry, his green blade humming low and steady, the two of them closing the distance together rather than separately for the first time in the duel. Not master and student in any hierarchy the old order would recognize, but two equals, converging on a single shared conclusion. Backed into a corner he is, Yoda observes, watching Sidious retreat toward the rotunda's shattered edge, lightsaber raised but body language betraying every ounce of the fear his voice still refuses to admit. "Good," Anakin says. "Let him feel it. Just once." Sidious's heel catches the rotunda's broken railing, the drop behind him, a long fall into the coruscant undercity he spent decades pretending to govern on behalf of people he's only ever seen as instruments. His lightsaber hand wavers. The yellow eyes, for the first time in this entire saga, hold nothing but the desperate calculation of a creature who has run out of contingencies. The dynamic of the fight has fully and irreversibly inverted, and every being left conscious in the chamber, senators, guards, the two figures advancing without hurry, can feel it settle into place like a verdict already decided, waiting only for its final, formal execution. Pods that had scattered toward the exits begin, cautiously to drift back toward the rail, their occupants unable to look away from the thing now unfolding at the chamber's broken edge. They close the distance together, no longer separate combatants circling a shared enemy, but a single coordinated motion, the way two halves of the same intention finally converge. Yoda moves low and fast along the rotunda's broken floor. Anakin advances at eye level, lightsaber rising at last, its blue blade humming steady in the wreckage lit dark. Neither needs to call the timing. It arrives on its own, the synergy promised by everything they now shared, free of any old hierarchy of master and student. Sidious raises his crimson blade in a defense that has nothing left behind it but reflex. The clash that follows is short, almost merciful in its brevity. There is no need to prolong it. The duel's true climax already happened in the chamber's center, in a hand that refused to burn. What remains now is consequence, not escalation. Yoda's blade sweeps low, forcing Sidious's stance to buckle. Anakin's strike hatches the crimson blade at an angle that tears it from a trembling grip and sends it skittering across the marble into the dark. The weapon's hum cutting out the moment it leaves his hand. Sidious stands disarmed, his bare hands curling at his sides, his breath coming fast and uneven. Finished, this is, Yoda says, his voice carrying no triumph, only the flat clarity of a fact finally arriving. Sidious's eyes dart between them, calculating still, the last reflexes of 40 years' cunning refusing to accept the verdict even with no cards left to play. "You think yourselves merciful," he says, his voice regaining a thin edge of its old persuasive music. "Two Jedi, standing over an unarmed old man. How very noble." "Unarmed you have never been," Anakin says. He's right to say it. Sidious's hand snaps upward without warning, a final desperate burst of dark side energy crackling from his fingertips, aimed not at Anakin this time, but in a wide, indiscriminate arc toward the senators still huddled near the chamber's edge, Bail Organa shielding Mon Mothma with his own body, a cluster of junior aides frozen too far from any cover. It's the last move of a creature with nothing left to lose, and no instinct toward anything but damage on his way down. Anakin's blade intercepts it. He doesn't think about the choice. There isn't time to think, only to act from the stillness Yoda spent 2 days teaching him to trust, the lightsaber catching the bolt and grounding it harmlessly into the rotunda's scarred floor, the senators behind him, untouched, gasping, alive. It is, in its way, the final proof Sidious's death needs to be clear-eyed, rather than vengeful. This isn't a man who surrendered and was struck down anyway. This is a creature who, given one last chance to do anything other than harm, chose harm again, and chose it last. You had a choice, Anakin says quietly, advancing the final step between them. You always had a choice. You just never wanted to make a different one. Sidious's mouth opens, perhaps for one final manipulation, one final reframing of villainy as victimhood, and whatever words he meant to use never arrive. Anakin's blade moves clean and direct, driven not by fury, but by the simple, settled gravity of a necessary act completed without relish. The blue blade passes through Sidious's chest. There is no triumphant cry, no roar of victory. Anakin holds the position a moment, his expression carrying weight rather than satisfaction, and Sidious's body goes rigid, his yellow eyes widening with something that might in the final instant be closer to confusion than fear, as though even now he cannot fully process an ending he never modeled into his understanding of the universe. The dark side that has saturated this body for over 4 decades doesn't simply end. It erupts and dissipates outward in a single visible pulse, a wrongness the Force itself seems to exhale in relief. The pressure that has hung over the galaxy since before either Anakin or Yoda were born finally, irrevocably released. Senators nearest the chamber's center feel it as a physical sensation, a cold gust passing through bodies that have no name for what just touched them, an absence where a presence had always silently been. Sidious's body slides from the blade and collapses to the marble floor, and Coruscant's galactic senate falls utterly, completely silent for the first time since the session began. A silence that holds for nearly 10 full seconds, an eternity in a chamber built for the constant low murmur of debate. Anakin extinguishes his lightsaber. His hand, the same one that met apocalyptic lightning without flinching an hour earlier, trembles faintly now. Not from fear, but from the simple human weight of having ended a life. Even a life that had earned its ending 1,000 times over, in this telling and in every other. Yoda steps to his side, watching the body of the most dangerous being either of them has ever known lie motionless on a chamber floor built for debate rather than death. Over the Sith are, Yoda says quietly, after 1,000 years, over. Around them, slowly, senators begin to emerge from behind overturned pods and shattered railings. Bail Organa rises first, helping Mon Mothma to her feet, both of them staring at the scene with the particular shock of people who have just watched the architecture of their entire political reality collapse and rebuild itself in under 10 minutes. Padmé's pod descends toward the chamber floor, her eyes finding Anakin's across the wreckage, and something passes between them that neither needs to say aloud yet. Relief, recognition, the beginning of a future neither dared imagine surviving to see. Yoda's hand finds Anakin's shoulder. It is the same gesture from a meditation chamber 3 days and an entire lifetime ago, the same 3-fingered weight settling in the same place. Except this time it isn't an apology for failure. It's an acknowledgement of something earned, something completed. Redemption answered rather than merely confessed. Failed you once, I did, Yoda says, his voice low enough that it belongs only to the two of them amid the chaos resolving around them. Failed you again, I will not. Anakin doesn't answer in words. He simply places his own hand briefly over Yoda's, the two of them standing together in the wreckage of a chamber that, an hour ago, held the architecture of a war neither of them intends to let happen again. The senators' voices begin to rise around them. Questions, relief, disbelief tangled together into something that will take the Republic weeks to fully process. But at the chamber's center, in the small space between an old master and the man he failed and then refused to fail twice, there is only stillness. The war that built Darth Vader has just ended before Darth Vader could ever exist. Padmé finds him an hour later in a side chamber off the rotunda, where medics have set up a triage station for the handful of injuries the chaos produced, none of them severe. Anakin sits alone on an overturned equipment crate, his armor of calm finally slipping now that there's no one left in the room who needs him to hold it together. His hands rest open on his knees, palms up, as though he's still half expecting to find lightning gathered there. "You're not hurt," Padmé says, not quite a question, crossing the room to kneel in front of him, her hands finding his. "No," he says. "I don't think I could be. Not by that, anyway." She studies his face for a long moment, reading something in it that she doesn't yet have the full story to name, though she suspects, with the particular instinct of a woman who has spent years learning to read the smallest shifts in this exact face, that the story is larger than anything she's been told so far. "There's a lot you haven't said," she says gently. "About all of this. About what changed 3 days ago." "There is," Anakin admits. "I'll tell you everything. Not all at once. I don't think I have the words for all of it at once yet. But everything. Eventually. I promise you that." Padmé nods, accepting it the way she has learned to accept the parts of him that arrive slowly, in their own time rather than all at once on command. "I believe you," she says. "I also believe, whatever it was, it changed something in you for the better. I don't need the details tonight to see that much." He pulls her into him then, his arms folding around her with a careful, deliberate gentleness, the embrace of a man who has learned, somewhere in a future he refuses to let happen again, exactly what it costs to lose this, and has decided, now, never to take a single ordinary moment of it for granted again. Outside the chamber, the rotunda continues its long process of recovering itself. Senators and aides and medics moving through the wreckage in the particular brisk, shaken rhythm of people putting a shattered evening back into some kind of order. None of it touches the small room where Anakin and Padmé sit together, her head against his chest, his chin resting against her hair, the two of them simply breathing in a silence that has nothing left in it to fear. The weeks that follow move with the brisk efficiency of a republic finally permitted to heal. The Senate, shaken but functional, begins the unglamorous work of dismantling a war engineered from its own chancellor's office. Separatist leadership, stripped of Sith coordination, falters within days. Peace negotiations open on a dozen fronts faster than anyone thought possible once the architect of the conflict was no longer alive to extend it. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma lead the charge for transparency hearings, the two of them suddenly thrust into a kind of moral authority neither sought, but both accept without hesitation. The 501st, along with allied legions quietly freed of their hidden trigger, stand down from offensive postures across the outer rim, their loyalty no longer a liability waiting to detonate, their commanders, slowly, carefully, beginning to imagine what a war's end might actually look like after years of assuming it would never come. It isn't the chapter's focus, and it doesn't need to be. The galaxy's recovery is a backdrop now, not a battle. The true center of this final movement happens in the Jedi Council chamber, where the 12 seats that once formed a circle of cautious, fractured authority hold something different now. A room full of masters who have spent the past weeks hearing, in careful pieces, just how close their order came to destroying itself from within. Obi-Wan sits with his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable, the particular stillness of a man who has had to revise his entire understanding of his closest friend in the space of a single briefing and is still, weeks later, finding new corners of that revision to absorb. He has asked Anakin, privately, only once, why he never said anything, and the answer, quiet and without bitterness, had cost him more than the question had. "Would you have believed me?" Anakin had asked. "Before any of this?" Obi-Wan hadn't answered right away. That, in its own way, had been answer enough. Yoda stands at the chamber's center, rather than seated among them, his cane planted firm against the stone floor, and when he speaks, there is none of the old inverted hesitance in his cadence. The words arrive plainly, the way a man speaks when he has finally stopped circling a truth he spent centuries avoiding. "Finished. The old order is," he says. The chamber holds its silence, even Mace Windu's usual sharp skepticism quieted by the gravity in the small master's bearing. Mace, for his part, has spent the weeks since the Rotunda revisiting his own long-held suspicion of Palpatine, and finding it both vindicated and insufficient. He had sensed something wrong in the man for years, and had still, in the end, needed two beings from outside the normal architecture of time to actually stop him. It is not a comfortable thing to sit with, and he has not pretended otherwise to anyone who has asked, including himself. "Feared attachment we did," Yoda continues, Isolated a frightened child, we did, and called it discipline. Taught suppression instead of mastery, and called it peace. Built, with our own hands, the very darkness we swore to prevent. He looks slowly around the circle, meeting each set of eyes in turn. Mine. This failure is more than any other's. Carried it, I have, for far too long, without naming it honestly. What replaces it then? Mace asks. And there's no challenge in the question now, only the genuine need of a man rebuilding his understanding of everything he's devoted his life to. The living force, Yoda says. Connection over detachment. Compassion over suppression. Service to the galaxy, not entanglement with its politics. A Jedi who feels fully and acts from stillness beneath the feeling, not a Jedi who feels nothing at all. He pauses, and something almost gentle crosses his ancient face. Qui-Gon understood this, long before I did. Listened to him, I should have. He turns, slow and deliberate, and faces the council as a body rather than as its head. Step down, I will, as Grand Master. The announcement lands with weight, but no alarm follows it. Only a kind of settling, as though the room has been waiting for permission to imagine an order that doesn't require 900 years of authority standing over every decision. Master Yoda, Obi-Wan says, carefully, the order has never known leadership without you. Precisely the problem that is, Yoda says, and there's warmth in it now, something close to humor. An order that cannot imagine itself without me. Too small an order is. Time it is for a teacher's final lesson, making room rather than standing over. He looks to Anakin, who has remained quiet at the chamber's edge throughout the address, and gestures him forward. Granted, the rank of master is, Yoda says simply, earned 100 times over this rank was. Denied once by an order too frightened to see clearly. Corrected, that denial is. The council inclines as one, the formal vindication arriving at last for a man who spent the original timeline of his life waiting for recognition that never came in time to save him. Anakin receives it with quiet gravity rather than triumph. A small nod, his eyes briefly closing. Beside him, Obi-Wan's hand finds his shoulder, brief and wordless, the closest either of them comes in that room to saying everything they still haven't found the language for. There is one more matter, Anakin says, when the formality settles. I'm not staying on Coruscant. The room doesn't erupt the way it once might have. There's no accusation of attachment, no debate about code violations, no fear dressed up as procedure. Mace studies him for a long moment, and what passes between them is something closer to understanding than judgment. Padmé, Mace says. It isn't a question. Padmé, Anakin confirms. And our children, Naboo has a home waiting for us. I want to raise them there, away from war rooms, away from politics, away from everything that nearly cost me everything once before. He glances at Yoda. The galaxy doesn't need me standing in this chamber to be safe. It needed the truth, and the truth is told now. Then go, Yoda says simply, no hesitation in it at all. Deserved this peace is. Earned, many times over. The council rises as the session closes, the formal business of an institution remaking itself giving way, for a moment, to something quieter and more personal. Obi-Wan crosses the chamber to where Anakin stands and embraces him without ceremony, the gesture brief and slightly awkward in the way of two men more accustomed to expressing affection through banter than through anything direct, and Anakin returns it with a firmness that says everything the embrace itself doesn't need to. Naboo suits you already, Obi-Wan says, stepping back, studying his former Padawan with something that looks, for the first time in longer than either of them can easily measure, like uncomplicated pride. You look like a man who's stopped waiting for the other boot to fall. I have, Anakin says. Took me a while to believe it would stay that way. I think I finally do. Good, Obi-Wan says. Right. Often, I mean it this time. I will, Anakin says. And for once, he knows it's a promise he'll actually keep. 2 years pass. Naboo's coastline holds none of Coruscant's relentless gray sprawl. The water here runs pale gold under afternoon light, gentle waves folding against a shore where a modest house sits on a rise, overlooking the sea. Deliberately unremarkable, deliberately far from anything resembling a throne room, or a reactor shaft, or the cold metal architecture of a life that, in another telling, swallowed this man whole. The house has a name no one bothered giving it. Just a low stone structure with wide windows and a roof that has needed patching twice already, both times by Anakin's own hands. Because there is a particular satisfaction in fixing something with tools instead of a lightsaber, in solving a problem that stays solved. Mornings here begin with the sound of the tide rather than the hum of speeder traffic. Padmé has taken to walking the shoreline before the children wake, her bare feet leaving prints that the water erases within minutes. A small daily ritual of presence in a life that, for so long, had none of the stillness to spare for ritual at all. She has not held public office since the Senate dissolved its emergency session into something resembling order again. She was asked, more than once, to return. There were senators who wanted her wisdom in the rebuilding, governors who remembered her work on Naboo's own recovery a decade earlier, and she declined each time, gently, without explaining more than she needed to. Some decisions don't require justification beyond the fact that they're hers to make. Anakin stands on the balcony with his daughter asleep against his shoulder, her small hand curled against his collar, her breathing slow and even in the particular way of a child who has fallen asleep mid-thought. Luke toddles across the floor inside, chasing something only he can see, Padmé's laughter trailing after him through the open doors, bright and unguarded. The laugh of a woman who no longer has to calculate the political cost of every expression that crosses her face. The sun sits low over the water, gilding everything it touches, the sea, the worn stone of the balcony rail, the fine hairs at his daughter's temple where they've come loose from sleep. Anakin closes his eyes, just for a moment, and feels the force settle around him the way it has every day since the rotunda. Steady, warm, no longer flickering toward fear. No longer haunted by the phantom weight of a mask he'll never have to wear in this life. The grief of the man he was in another timeline hasn't vanished. It never will. He still wakes, sometimes, from dreams that aren't quite nightmares anymore but aren't peaceful either. Dreams of a son he raised differently than the son sleeping in the next room. Of a daughter who, in another telling, grew up never knowing her father's name until it was carved into a funeral pyre. But it no longer poisons anything. It simply sits beside the joy. Both held at once, neither canceling the other out, the way Yoda taught him a mind could hold contradiction without breaking under the weight of it. He thinks briefly of Yoda, somewhere out among the stars now, no longer Grandmaster, traveling instead to find whatever quiet purpose remains for a teacher who has finally finished teaching the lesson that mattered most. A transmission arrives every few months, brief and characteristically circuitous, reporting on some distant world or some small act of quiet service that Yoda never frames as significant even when it plainly is. The last one had come from a planet on the Outer Rim, whose name Anakin didn't recognize, a single line about a drought finally broken, and a farming community that would eat through the winter because of it. No mention of how. There rarely is. If he listens, in the wind off the water, he can almost hear the old voice one last time, the way he sometimes does at the edge of sleep. The cadence of it is familiar now as his own heartbeat. Balance, this was never about. Never about the absence of love. Never about the absence of fear or darkness. Only about a Jedi finally strong enough to hold all of it, without breaking. Inside the house, Luke has abandoned whatever he was chasing and is now attempting, with the single-minded determination of a child who has not yet learned the word for failure, to climb onto a chair that is slightly too tall for him. Padmé crosses to steady him without quite catching him, letting him do most of the work himself, her hand hovering close enough to catch a fall but far enough to let him learn the shape of the climb. It's a small thing, the kind of moment that would mean nothing to anyone watching from outside this house. And it means everything to the two people raising him, neither of them flinching toward overprotection, neither of them so afraid of loss that they cannot let their son learn, in small ways, what it costs and what it teaches to try something difficult, and occasionally fail at it. Padmé steps onto the balcony beside him, resting her head against his arm, watching the same sunset, Luke now perched triumphantly on the chair behind her, narrating something to an audience of no one in the particular fluent nonsense of a child not yet 2. "What are you thinking about?" she asks. Anakin looks down at his daughter, then through the doors at his son, then out at the water turning the color of fire and gold all at once. "Nothing I need to carry alone anymore," he says. Padmé doesn't press further. She has learned, across 2 years of a marriage no longer hidden in a footlocker, that some of what her husband carries belongs only to him, fragments of a life he describes only in pieces, when he's ready, and never all at once. She has stopped needing the whole shape of it, The pieces he offers are enough, because what matters isn't the content of what he carries, but the fact that he no longer carries it like something he has to hide from her. Obi-Wan's transmission came through this morning, she says, after a while. He's bringing the twins' godparents' gift in person next month. Apparently. Something about not trusting the post with it. Knowing him, that's not an exaggeration, Anakin says, and there's an easy warmth in it that would have been unthinkable between them once. The particular comfort of a friendship that survived a confession instead of being destroyed by one. The conversation drifts the way conversations do at the end of a long, unremarkable day, the kind of day neither of them takes for granted, having both, in their own ways, lived through versions of this life where unremarkable days were the rarest currency the galaxy had to offer. They talk about nothing urgent. A leak in the boathouse roof? A letter from Bail Organa about the Senate's latest committee on war reparations, work Padmé still cares about even from a distance, even without a title attached to her opinions. A half-formed plan to visit the lake country before the season turns, the same lake where 2 rings were once exchanged, with no witness but a protocol droid and the water itself. Below the balcony, the tide continues its slow work against the shore, indifferent to all of it, the way tides have always been indifferent to the small, enormous things happening on the land beside them. The sun finishes its descent into the sea, and the house on the rise grows quiet, lit from within by a warmth that has nothing left to fear from the dark. Inside, Luke finally tires of his chair and allows himself to be carried to bed, already half asleep before Padmé has crossed the room with him. Anakin lingers on the balcony a moment longer, his daughter still warm and heavy against his shoulder, watching the last color drain from the water, and the first stars come up over a horizon that holds, as far as he can tell from here, nothing waiting to take any of this away from him. He thinks, one last time before he follows his family inside, of a different version of this exact hour, a throne room instead of a balcony, a black mask instead of an open sky, a son who had to remove that mask with his own hands just to see his father's face once before it stopped being a face at all. He lets the thought pass through him the way Yoda taught him to let everything pass through him now, without flinching from it and without holding on to it longer than it needs to stay. Then he turns and carries his daughter inside, toward the warm light of a home that exists now because 2 people who had already lost everything once decided, together, on a small green planet, a long way from anywhere either of them was born, that they were not going to lose it the same way twice. Behind him, the last of the daylight slides off the water, and the first cool breath of evening moves up from the shore, carrying with it nothing but salt and the distant call of some seabird settling in for the night, indifferent to everything it has just witnessed, the way ordinary evenings always are, when the extraordinary thing they're built on top of has finally quietly become someone's whole life. There is, after all, no greater victory than this, a war that never has to be fought twice, and a family that gets to grow old in the quiet it bought them. The door closes softly behind him, the tide keeps moving. Somewhere among the stars, an old master who once carried 900 years of guilt by himself continues teaching the same lesson, quietly, to anyone who still needs to hear it. That love was never the danger, that the fear of losing it always was, and that a mind finally at peace with both can hold an entire galaxy's worth of weight without ever once being asked to carry it alone. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.